All right, guys, my name is Jay, and this is Allison, and welcome to our Deadlift 101 series. All right, so today we're going to be talking to you about the conventional deadlift and maybe Romanian deadlift and stuff like that if we get into it. But conventional deadlift setup, and then some of the common errors we see in deadlifting here in class and ways that we want to try to go about addressing fixing those. But first things first, all right, so doing a deadlift, we have to, or we're going to build anything, we have to build a really solid foundation. And so the deadlift is not any different than that. So Allison's going to talk about or demonstrate our setup for the deadlift. So she's going to come up. I tell all my athletes setting up for anything pulling off the ground, a good rule of thumb is I want to kind of put my shoelaces underneath the clear part of the barbell right there, all right? So notice that, she was about an inch or so from the bar. Shoelaces underneath the clear part of the barbell, about hip width apart is what we're looking for. Good to go. All right, next thing up, we're going to work our way up. So we're going to talk about our hips, and we're going to talk about external rotation. So here, you can really barely see this, but you just kind of have to try this on your own. But she's going to keep her feet perfectly straight, just like they are here. But inside her shoes, she's going to kind of rotate her feet out clockwise or externally rotate those feet. And that's what that's going to do. It's going to activate the hip musculature and get her ready to use the glutes and the hips and all these muscles on the posterior chain for the deadlift. So hopefully you can see this happen when she does this external rotation. You'll see the knees kind of come out and her hips kind of come forward. And she has turned everything on from the waist down, ready to go. All right, so the next step. Nice tight core, and what I mean by that, looking at her from the side, she's going to kind of exhale, deep breath in, tighten the core, pull those shoulders back, and then everything is in line on the back side. And so from her ear basically down to her tailbone, you can imagine just a firm, straight rod. At that point, when she bends over to pick up that barbell, nothing moves. That means her head is on that same neutral pivot as her spine here. So she's going to send those hips back, bend over and grab that bar. If you can see the back here, nice flat back. Grabbing the barbell just an inch or so outside her knees, her shins, and her knees are kind of pressed out into her forearms, and that's a good solid setup. From here, simply driving those heels into the ground, pulling those knees back. I like to say you're falling backwards. So she's just simply going to stand up. If that barbell were to break, she would actually fall backwards as opposed to pulling through her toes and kind of come forward. So give me a couple more reps, Allison. So driving through those full foot, but predominantly through the heels, pulling those knees back as she rises. That barbell is going to go straight up and then squeezing the glutes at the top, noticing that back, and everything stays in one straight line throughout the whole process of the deadlift, all right? Okay, so another variation of deadlift we will do on occasion here at CrossFit Cygnus is the Romanian deadlift. All right, so Romanian deadlift, a couple key differences. Basically, we usually like to start at the top, which is why I have the barbell here in the rack. And we like to keep our legs just a little bit straighter. It's a little more hamstring intensive than the conventional deadlift. All right, so to do the Romanian deadlift, Allison's just going to come up, grab the barbell, and like I said, we're starting at the top, so she's going to back up a little bit here. And then here, the key thing is everybody's going to be a little bit different on depth. If we have hamstring limitations, we're not going to go as deep, but she's simply going to send those hips back, just like on a conventional deadlift, keeping those legs mostly straight, get below until the weights will not touch the ground, but she's going to go as far as her body allows her before the weight touches the ground, and then stand up kind of forcefully, just kind of using a lot of power on the return, the concentric portion of the deadlift, all right? So this, if you see Romanian deadlifts on the Sugar Wad app, this is the way we will perform them here at CrossFit Cygnus. Okay, so now we're going to talk to you about several flaws that we commonly see in the deadlift movement. All right, so probably the first and most frequent we see is really an erroneous setup. Where Allison, she's going to bend down, but she's not kind of keeping her head looking forward, and doing so, that does not allow her. She does not sit up that spine nice and tight before she bends over, and then as she's looking forward, as she goes to lift the weight off the ground, we have a little rounding of the back on the way up. Go ahead and give me another rep just like that. I don't get overly concerned when it's more the thoracic spine, but when we start bending in the lumbar, that is bad news, and I will stop you immediately doing that. So make sure before we go into that setup that go down to pick up that bar, we pull those shoulders back, we brace our core, then go down, pick up that bar and everything is nice and flat. Now, once we're here, even if we get here in a good position, another common error we see is what we like to call stripper booty, all right? So she's going to basically straighten those legs, raising her hips before she raises her shoulders. So basically that becomes an all hamstring and then lower back deadlift, all right? So the stripper booty, we want those hips and those shoulders about a 30-degree angle. We want them rising at the same rate until that barbell passes the knee, and then she just squeezes the glutes and finishes the movement. All right, and then once we're up here at the top, the final and probably most aggravating error I see is basically failure of the hip hinge on the way back down. And she allows her knees to kind of come forward as part of the descent, and then has to move the barbell around the knees. All right, I mean, if you do this about 5 times, it's going to wear your lower back out. And if you're saying, hey, my back hurts when I deadlift, more than likely we're doing something like this where we're allowing that bar to come out in front of us, having to travel around those knees as opposed to keeping it close to my body over those shoelaces and letting the glutes and the hamstrings do all the work. All right. So those are 3 common errors, and now we're going to move over here and we're going to talk about fixing them. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of the methods we use to fix those faulty deadlifts we just talked about. Probably the most important part of the deadlift that's to ensure we're doing it right is what we call the hip hinge, all right? And so this little setup here we have teaches the hip hinge and makes sure that we kind of carry this over to the barbell. So what we have here, we have Allison up against a bench. Her calves are against the bench, and we have a kettlebell that we're basically replaced the barbell with a kettlebell. It'd be in the same position, that kettlebell handle going over her shoelaces. All right, so the key here is Allison must keep her calves in touch with the bench behind her. In order to do that, when she bends over to pick up the kettlebell, she has to really hinge at the hips, send those hips way back. All right, and this is the perfect position that we're looking for in that deadlift. And she's going to simply keep those calves in contact with the bench, stand up, knock out about 3 to 5 reps of deadlifts here. And this is going to reinforce that hip hinge movement to kind of keep those knees from coming forward as the first part of that deadlift descent, all right? So that is one of the corrective exercises we do. The other thing we do, if we're in the middle of the Metcon and I'm seeing you walk around and those knees are coming forward on that deadlift, I like to bring you over to the rig. So we'll walk over here to the rig, and I'm going to put you up against something. If you look at this deadlift bar, we have about a 1/2 inch play before it makes contact with the rig here. So she's going to sit up for that deadlift just like we have all talked about. Bend over, picking up that bar, and as she stands up, it should not hit the rig, obviously. But coming down, as she allows those knees to come forward, do it wrong, Allison. Allow those knees to come forward. She kind of runs into the rig, and that, like I said, she's not allowed to do, not able to get the bar down. So we got to send those hips back, get that nice little hip hinge on the way down, and that's going to keep the bar traveling straight up and down as opposed to allowing that bar to come forward and putting a lot of strain on her lower back. All right, so those are 2 of the methods we like to use to kind of correct faulty deadlift form.